This is Danny Bobrow, President of AIM Dental Marketing, welcoming you to this installment of the Practice Perfection web-based education series. Today's presentation is entitled, Protect Your Wallet from Your Practice's Potential Pickpocket. David Harris may have the coolest job in dentistry. He gets to chase and catch those who steal from dentists. A rule breaker in his youth, David changed his direction and has spent much of his adult life in the world of investigation and enforcement, where he uses his unrivaled ability to understand the criminal thought process to help educate and protect dentists. David is the Chief Executive Officer of Prosperident, the world's largest firm investigating financial crimes committed against dentists. He is a licensed private investigator, a forensic certified public accountant, and a certified fraud examiner. David is author of the book, Dental Embezzlement, The Art of Theft and the Science of Control, and over 30 articles in dental publications. In addition to being a prolific author, David is a frequent presenter at regional, national, and international dental conferences, and, as you will soon hear, his vast wealth of experience, coupled with his keen sense of humor, make David both an engaging and entertaining speaker. Being a dental business owner, you owe it to yourself to understand how and why embezzlement happens, and how to protect yourself and your practice, which is why I applaud and acknowledge you for taking the time to hear David today. Today, David will share the surprising and sadly all too common occurrence of embezzlement in the dental setting, why people steal, and how to practice effective prevention, the persistent and dangerous myths about dental practice theft, red flags and how to read and act upon them, and the 3 things that you can do today to lower your risk. Before we get started with today's event, I remind you that Practice Perfection webcasts run for approximately 90 minutes. While attendees are in listen-only mode, we invite you at any time to submit your questions or comments using the question button on your screen. We will allow time following the presentation to get your questions answered. If we do not get to your question during the webcast, we'll see that they are answered shortly thereafter. Attendance at this presentation entitles you to receive 1.5 hours of continuing education credit with the compliments of Prosperident and AIM Dental Marketing. Shortly following the webcast, you will be emailed a brief survey and quiz to complete to receive your CE, again at no cost to you. Participants are cautioned about the dangers of incorporating techniques and procedures into their practice if the course has not provided them with adequate clinical experience to allow them to perform them competently. And now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Practice Perfection stage, Mr. David Harris. Hello, David.
Hey, Danny. It's so good to be with you. Danny is one of my oldest friends in dentistry, and I was just thrilled when he asked me to do this. So I am honored to be sharing the podium with you tonight, my friend.
Pleasure is mine.
All right. Well, let's get started then. There's not much else I want to add to Danny's introduction. I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes, maybe about what got me to this weird place I am in as the investigator of dental crimes. But I'm going to start tonight by showing you a hidden camera. What we're going to do is we're going to see somebody who comes into a space in a practice. It happens to be the doctor's private office. It's a staff member coming in, and let's watch what she does. And Danny, I don't know if audio comes through with this or not. I've added some music. It'll be a good test, but I've also added some captions just so you get some idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw yourself on speaker, then we probably ought to be able to hear your audio.
Don't know if I can do that. Okay, well let's do our best and see what happens.
You could hum a few bars for us if you like.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
And you can see what she does there right at the end. She goes into the doctor's purse and she helps herself. Now, this is the crudest form of embezzlement imaginable. I mean, this is just a snatch and grab. And the kind of things that we see in a dental practice tend to be much more sophisticated than this, but this is the baseline. That's me in about 1982, and I'm just finishing a beach landing. I had launched out of a submarine before we went live. Danny and I were talking about how life on a submarine is not a whole lot of fun. The reason that I'm wearing that suit and beret is because, well, first of all, I experienced an early unplanned ejection from high school, and the Army ended up taking me in and looking after me and finishing my education and doing a lot of other things. But yeah, I wasn't much of a student, and when I got kicked out of school, I fell into hanging around with the wrong people and making some bad decisions. And eventually I got put in front of a judge who said to me, green or orange. And I didn't really understand where the judge was going with this. So I asked him the question and he said, well, green or orange? Green is the color you wear in the Army and orange is the one you wear in prison. Which one do you want? And I said, green, please. So, you know, I was, to put this into context, this was sort of right after the end of the Vietnam War. I was 15 years old at the time. The recruiting sergeant obligingly stepped away from the photocopier so that I could change the date on my birth certificate, and away I went. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was where I belonged. And everything made sense in a way that the world hadn't that far. And I progressed quickly, and eventually the Army decided that I needed a college education. This was without the benefit of a high school diploma, so I got sent away to school. And eventually I left the Army. I went to work for a bank. I lasted a few years. I really got tired of watching people make the same mistakes over and over again and not really learn, so I quit my job. This was 1989. I was sitting at home watching TV and trying to avoid thinking about my future when the phone rang. And it was a guy I'd been in high school with in my brief sojourn there, who was now a dentist. And he said to me, I think my front desk person's stealing from me, and David, I don't have anyone else to call. So he caught me at the exact right moment. There was nothing good on TV. This was before there was such a thing as a PVR. So basically you watched whatever the networks decided you should have. And in August, that wasn't very interesting. So I said to my friend, no problem. I'll meet you tonight at work after your practice closes. And that night I went over to his practice. This was, again, 1989. So his practice, like every practice in 1989, was not computerized. He was using the old pegboard system that some of the audience might remember. And I got to his office and my friend shoved a bunch of ledgers at me. And I said to him, no, actually, we're going to solve this in a little different way. And I said, where does your suspect work? Show me her workspace. So my friend took me there and I started going through her desk drawers. And what I found Danny taped underneath one of her drawers was a notebook that I quickly recognized was her cheat book. So embezzlers often need to write down what they've done so that they can keep track of what's real and what's fiction in the patient accounts. And nowadays, when we find a cheat book, it's typically an Excel spreadsheet, but in 1989, it was a handwritten notebook. So I found the cheat book, and what she was doing unraveled pretty quickly after that. So I showed my friend how it was happening. You know, we came up with a quick total. It was about $40,000, which was big dollars in those days, but would be tiny today. And my friend asked me to come back in the next morning to help him fire this staff member because he didn't want to face that alone. So I said, sure. And after that was done, my friend promised to buy me dinner, which, by the way, I'm still waiting for. And I walked away thinking, that was interesting. But I didn't really see a career for myself yet. And then 2 weeks later, everything changed. What happened 2 weeks later was I was going into my own dentist's office for an appointment. And imagine what went through my mind when I had my hand on his front door and I was about to go in. And I looked through the glass panel in the door, and sitting at his front desk was the same woman I helped fire at my friend's office 2 weeks ago.
Oh my God.
What I said to Annie was a little less polite than that. As I ran to a payphone, because in 1989, a cell phone was like the size of a briefcase, and you just didn't carry one around for fun. So I called the office. I used a bit of deception to get put through, to get past the receptionist to my doctor. And when I got him on the phone, I explained the time bomb that was ticking away loudly at his front desk. And he asked me in a panicked voice, "What the hell do I do now?" And about 2 sentences later, he hired me. And by the time I finished his job, the local Henry Schein rep had realized what I was doing, and he had a couple of clients with concerns. And suddenly I was in business. And 32 years later, I'm still here. Now, it started as a solo operation. We currently have about 25 people. And one thing that's never changed is that we only work with dentists, so we don't help medical doctors or pharmacists or anybody else. It is dentists only. But the basic rush that you get when you catch somebody stealing, for me, has never gone away. One question that everybody has here is, well, what are the chances? And the American Dental Association did a study. They in 2018, they asked 17,000 dentists, have you been embezzled? And the good news is that 53% of them said, as far as I know, I have not. This is a question that's a little bit difficult sometimes to give an absolute answer to. So 53% said, I don't think so. And everybody in the audience recognizes that the other 47% said yes. What the ADA did next, though, was it asked the people who said yes, okay, how many times? And what they found was that 26%, in other words, about half of those who said yes, said, as far as I know, once. We had 11% who were double dippers, 2% 3 times, and 8% said 4 or more times, as far as I know. One little interesting exercise you can do here is take 26% times 1, and 11% times 2, and 2% times 3, and 8% times, let's assume, 4. And if you do that, you come up with about 92 embezzlements per 100 dentists. Now, there are a couple of unknowns here. What I will tell the audience is that the 47% is underreported. In other words, the true number is higher. It's higher for a couple of reasons. First of all, because some embezzlement happens and never gets detected. And some embezzlement gets caught by the doctor, but for a whole myriad of reasons, they never tell anybody. Those are both unquantifiable, but the real number is something higher than 47%. The other unknown is how many of the 53% who said, I don't think so, will be victims in the rest of their careers.
Or are already victims, right, David? I mean,
Yeah,
they say they haven't been, they don't know. It could be.
That's true. They could have been stolen from already, or they could be stolen from in the future. The best number I can give the audience is probably this. If you graduated from dental school today, there's likely about a 70% chance that you'll be embezzled at some point in your career. Now, one other thing I want to show the audience. So this study was published in 2019, so 2 years ago. There was an earlier study that was done in 2007, and the ADA asked the same question. When they did in 2007, the percent of dentists who said yes was 35%. So over a span of 12 years, the percent who reported being embezzled went up from 35 to 47%. In other words, it increased by about a third over that 12 years. The thing we don't have any objective data on, but I certainly have some subjective feelings, is what's happened in the COVID era, because we are seeing more embezzlement now than we did even 2 or 3 years ago. So there's a long-term upward trend, and then there's likely also a little bit of a spike that's been caused by what's gone on in the past couple of years. And I'll talk in a minute about why I think that's happening. A few more statistics that I want to give, just in case the audience isn't uncomfortable enough yet. The first thing I'm going to say is that on average, when somebody's stealing, it goes on undetected for almost 2 years. This one's kind of interesting. Almost every thief that we catch is using multiple methods. We see very few people I would categorize as one-trick ponies. You know, like what any of you do with your 401k, where somebody tells you don't take all your money and put it into Apple stock. You know, you need to diversify. Embezzlers think exactly the same way about their portfolio. Their portfolio happens to be your cash inflow. But almost all of them employ multiple methods, and their methods may change over time, but the number 3 tends to stick with them. And the final statistic that I'll give is that the average amount stolen from our case files is about $109,000. So, you know, sometimes dentists tend to think of embezzlement as being kind of this minor irritant, sort of people taking pens from the front desk, or, you know, stealing stamps or something like that. And those things happen, but we also see $1 million+ thieves and everything in between. So we shouldn't dismiss this as an irritant. If you're 30 years old and somebody takes $100,000 from you, that will take roughly $800,000 out of the amount of money you have available to retire at age 65. So let's ask a really basic question. Why do people steal? And people steal for 2 reasons, and I call them need and greed. And needy thieves are exactly what it sounds like. This is somebody who, for whatever reason, has more money going out of their household each month than what's coming in. It could be that their spouse lost his job. It could be that they're going through a divorce and they're suddenly trying to support 2 households on the income that used to float one. It could be that they have an addiction, but there's something happening that creates a monthly negative number for them. And you can only sustain that for so long when you have to do something about it. And in some cases, the quote, do something about it is to steal. And then we've got greedy thieves. And they're pushed by a little different demon. They love the money they steal. I mean, that's not the issue, but they're really stealing to address an emotional deficit more so than a financial one. So greedy thieves will tend to spend the money in sort of ego-driven ways. One thing we see a lot of from these people is cosmetic surgery. Why? Because, you know, if they can come closer to what they perceive to be how an attractive person looks, they feel better about themselves. They will buy expensive clothing. They will take trips. They will buy front row concert tickets. One of our alumni, as we lovingly call them, would take a limousine to church every week. You know, it's driven by an ego deficit, and they will work hard to fill that, and that involves spending money in ways that they would never spend the money that they earn. So needy and greedy, they both embezzle. The thing about needy thieves is that they're trying to fill a fairly specific hole. You know, they may have a $1,400 a month negative household cash flow, in which case they tend to steal $1,400. And they feel bad about doing it, but they just don't think they have any alternative. Greedy thieves, on the other hand, are like a bottomless pit. A lot of them steal what they think the doctor should be paying them. In other words, they think that society is not rewarding their talents properly, and they're taking what they think they should be receiving based on their efforts. And one thing about thieves, and for that matter, everybody else, all staff overestimate how much the doctor takes home. What a lot of greedy thieves do is they kind of construct this partnership between themselves and the doctor. In other words, a lot of them look at their doctor as basically this high-functioning moron with good hands. And in their mind, the only reason the doctor's successful is because the thief keeps the doctor's chair full and collects money when patients leave it. So they forget some things. I mean, they forget how long the doctor spent in school and how much student debt she came out with and all those things. And they just think of this as two equals, except their quote peer takes home a lot more money than they do. So the greedy thief steals to address the imbalance. Before I get to how they do it, and all the pictures you're seeing on the screen are embezzlers. So if you see somebody that looks a lot like one of your staff, I'll put my contact information up at the end, and we really need to talk. One of my little frustrations is there are some enduring myths about embezzlement. And if we had a live audience here tonight, there'd probably be a couple of people sitting there with their arms folded and their faces are tight, maybe even having a little bit of bruxism. And what their body language and facial expression say is, you know, it might be the person to my left and it might be the person to my right, but it won't be me. And if I see that and I ask somebody why, they'll give me a reason that they're immune. For example, well, I pay my staff really well. And the typical embezzler will take between 2 and 4% of your collections each month. You know, if you're paying people $2 an hour above what is the local going rate, it doesn't come close to scratching that same itch. Or somebody will say, well, I live in a small town and all my staff used to be my patients and I know them all really well. Or, gosh, I'm a general dentist and, you know, embezzlement doesn't happen to us, it only happens to orthodontists or whatever. I mean, people will construct reasons why they think they're immune. And none of them really work. Thieves don't spend any time at all thinking about you and your situation. It's all driven by them. And it's kind of, I want, and simultaneously you have. So a lot of people believe they are immune. And other people think that there's some kind of magic pill. You know, if there's just something I could do in my office that would thwart thieves. And the problem with that kind of thinking, what people want to do here is they want to analogize to other types of crime that they understand a little better than embezzlement. And most of us have had some exposure to things like burglary. I mean, you know, we've been burglarized ourselves at home, or we know somebody who has. And what we want to do is take the understanding we have of that phenomenon and apply it to dentistry and embezzlement. So, simple statistic about burglary in your house. If you put an alarm system in your house, it reduces the chances of you being burglarized by about 60%. Danny, I'm guessing you have an alarm system at home.
I do.
Yeah, and it works really well. But let's talk about why it works. If my plan is to rob Danny's house and I get to his front door and I see the alarm sticker on the door, or I hear his big Doberman barking, or the thing that'll really make me reconsider is if I see the National Rifle Association life member sticker on his door.
Yep.
The question is, what do I do next? Do I give up my plan to rob houses and go home and join the church choir? Or do I go back on the sidewalk, go 75 feet down the street, find Danny's neighbor, and his house looks like a little easier target, so I go and rob his house? And we all know that the answer is the second one. In other words, Danny's alarm system has no impact whatsoever on the overall crime rate in Chicago. It's simply a zero-sum game where whatever amount the probability of Danny being robbed decreasing is matched by an increase in the probability of his neighbors being robbed. Right? That's what alarm systems do. So what everybody thinks about embezzlement is, I need the equivalent of the burglar alarm. And here's the flaw in that thinking. If I'm a burglar, and I will mention I have some experience, if I'm a burglar, I have no particular attachment to any victim. In other words, it's really easy for me to get back on the sidewalk, move one house down from Danny's and rob that one instead. I mean, I don't really care which house I rob. I just want somebody's big screen TV so I can sell it for $80 and buy drugs. On the other hand, an embezzler is pretty invested in the practice in which they work. And changing victims for them is a huge deal. I mean, I have to quit my job. I have to get hired somewhere else. I have to invest sufficient time in my new practice to understand the systems and get to know how the doctor thinks so I can steal. You know, to do all that requires a very patient thief, and I've never met one who's prepared to go through all that. What happens is very simple. If I'm working for you and the first way that I come up with to steal from you is blocked, I don't join the church choir or quit my job. I find the second way or the third way or the 10th way until I find one that will work. We had a staff member a couple of years ago do a little project where they cataloged how many different types of theft we had seen in dental practices. It was over 300. So if you think you can do the Dutch boy in the dike thing and block, you know, come up with the one and only one way that somebody's going to steal and then block it, you're being a little bit delusional. Two ways you can steal. The first way is called expense fraud, and expense fraud basically means getting the practice to pay out something that it's not supposed to. The other way to steal is called revenue fraud or skimming, and that involves stealing patient payments or insurance payments coming into the practice. When we compare these two to each other, in probably 85% of our cases, we see skimming. And we see expense side fraud in something less than 30%. There's some overlap where we see both, and it goes back to what I said about multi-mode thieves. But the main event here is very clearly skimming. Expense fraud happens, but it's kind of a sideshow. I'll give you a couple of examples of expense fraud just so you get the picture. The gal on the screen is one of the more prolific embezzlers I've encountered. Her name's Christy Corral. Christy's from California, and she took her doctor for about $1,060,000. The two examples I'm putting up are Amazon fraud. So a lot of practices are buying things with Amazon now, and one of the games that embezzlers play is that they'll order extra stuff. I mean, they'll get a barbecue delivered to their house, charged to the office Amazon account. And unless there's some oversight, they will get away with it. And there's also, as another example, manipulating payroll or bonuses. And, you know, if you have any kind of bonus that is not discretionary, in other words, if it's a formula bonus, there's probably some potential for manipulation. And one thing that I think every practice owner needs to do, and this is if you work with somebody like a practice management consultant, they can be a tremendous help here. But to sit down with that person and say, okay, so if somebody was going to play games with our bonus, how would they do it? I'll give you an example of what can happen here. Some offices use what I would call a threshold bonus. And the way a threshold bonus works is there's some target for collections or revenue or new patient exams or whatever, but there's some yardstick. And if we exceed that target, then everybody gets a check. And let's say you have one of those bonuses and the target is to collect $200,000 this month. Well, we're here on the 26th of August. If that was our office, probably 3 or 4 days ago, the staff all got together in the break room and they looked at how much collections were so far this month versus the target. And they try to put this month into one of three categories. Either it's a slam dunk, we've already got $195,000 in collections, so we're going to make the bonus. Or it's hopeless, we're sitting at $128,000 of collections with 8 days left in the month. Or it's pretty close, and if we all really pull together, we can make it. Danny, what do you think happens in the first case where we're basically already there on the 22nd of August?
Sandbag till next month.
Yeah, I don't want to collect any more money. I want, if insurance checks come in, I'm going to stick them in a drawer and I'll wait till the first of next month because there's no point in our collecting $240,000. That doesn't help us. What I would be better doing is, as Danny says exactly, great word, sandbagging. And, on the first day of the next month, pulling $40,000 of checks out of the drawer and putting them through the practice management software, and meaning that I'm already 20% of the way to getting my bonus. Let's take the opposite case, Danny, where collections are 128,000 and we've only got 5 working days left in the month. What do staff do then? Same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's no point in collecting another $40,000 this month that we could defer till next month and try to make our bonus happen next month. So when you look at what the bonus is trying to do, it really only achieves that goal in a very narrow band where, we're close, and if we just if we just push it a little bit, we'll make the bonus. On the two edges, which are actually much bigger, the bonus ends up doing something you don't want it to do. So when I say sit with your consultant or somebody who's your sounding board, maybe your accountant, what I'm really saying is let's ask ourselves, what games could people play with this bonus, and either reposition the bonus, have a different calculation, or do something so that you don't have people trying to game the system. Now I've got a video, but I already know the audio is not going to play, so I'm just going to skip over that. Let's talk about skimming or revenue side theft. And before we do that, let's just take a look at the background on this slide. And what you're seeing there is a thief's confession. And you can see what's underlined in red. I don't know how much I've taken, but it's less than $500. One thing I'm going to tell the audience about confessions is that people confess not because they feel guilty and they want to unburden themselves, but they're trying to minimize punishment. So what that means is when people confess, they don't confess to what they've done, they confess to the minimum they think you will believe. And on average, when somebody confesses, they admit to doing 1/6 of the stealing they actually did. In this case, it was a little more exaggerated than that. This woman had taken about $40,000. And you can see her confession of less than 500. In fact, there were a number of days when she took more than $500 in a single day. So She knew this was not correct. And of course, she's offering to pay back this very low amount, but please do not bring in the big bad auditors at Prosperident. The other words here that I want you to read, and I will come back to these a little bit later, in between the sentence that is in red and the one that's highlighted in blue, she says, I am being honest with you. And just hold on to that, because we're going to come back to it close to the end of the presentation. So I'm going to tell you one of the secrets of the universe. And this is how embezzlers think. And if I work for you and I want to steal from you, the first question I ask is very simple. If I'm the office manager, is anybody looking over my shoulder when I do day-end balancing? Put another way, does my practice owner know how much money should be going into the bank account, and do they check the account to see that that amount went in? If the answer to that is no, and it probably is the answer in 70 or 80% of practices, then what that means is that I can steal without having to do anything exotic in practice management software. So today in our practice, if $20,200 comes in, and I can steal some of it and only deposit $19,400, if nobody will notice that, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So what's coming away, and I'll circle back to this later in the presentation, but everybody who is doing balancing or reconciliation at the end of a day needs to have oversight. If it's your office manager doing it, you or somebody else needs to supervise. If it's being done by a receptionist, the office manager needs to supervise. Everybody needs a boss. And if you limit yourself to the clinical part of the practice and you pay no attention to this, then you're going to find your way into the statistics pretty fast. The other thing that happens in some practices is that there's oversight, but it's incomplete. For example, a lot of doctors will check the practice management software reports against cash and checks and make sure that that component of what goes into their bank is correct, but they will ignore credit card payments. And the way that all of you get credit card payments is that they're automatically deposited into your account. So it's really easy just to assume that that's monkey proof and I don't need to look at it. If that's you, so you look at cash and checks but not credit cards, then as a thief, what I'll do is very simple. I'll mischaracterize part of your deposit. So a patient will come in and pay in cash, and I'll put the cash in my pocket. What I'll enter into your software is credit card payment. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing the out of balance phenomenon from somewhere that you do look at to somewhere that you do not. So your reconciliation needs to deal with cash, checks, credit cards, electronic funds deposits, and third-party funding, like, for example, Care Credit or Lending Club. And if you leave one of those components out, I just shift what I'm stealing into that area, knowing that you won't notice. And if I think that you are looking at this and that simply partitioning the deposit between you and me would get me caught, then what I need to do is I need to teach your PMS, here means practice management software, not the other thing. I need to teach your practice management software how to lie about how much money comes in. Now, I'm not going to do a how-to class here, but I can tell you it's pretty easy. And if somebody sits and thinks about it for a little while or does some reading on the internet, they will figure out how to make your practice management software understate how much money comes in. I'm just going to repeat something that Danny said at the outset. He said, if you have questions, please enter them into the program, go to a webinar that you're looking at. We have time at the end and we'd love to answer them. So just jot those questions down as they come to you. Please don't hold on to them in your head and then hope you remember them at the end.
We are getting some questions too, David, but thank you for encouraging everybody to, not keep them in their head.
Yep, we've set aside time, and if we do run out of time tonight, I'll be happy to take them up with you one-on-one later.
Great.
The next thing I want to tell people is that when I talk to a lot of doctors about embezzlement, what is in their mind is the theft of cash. So like $20 bills going sideways. And don't take me out of context here. Cash is the first choice of every thief. But there are a couple of phenomena that are happening. One is that there's a long-term trend that the amount of cash that practices take in is declining. When I started in this business in 1989, a typical practice would take in 6 to 8% of its revenue in cash. In 2019, that number was probably down in the average practice to about 2%. And you know what? A lot of practices over the last year used COVID as a reason to no longer accept cash at all. So as a thief, none of that changes my need for money. So I have to up my game a little bit. What I can tell you is that it is ridiculously easy to take a check with somebody else's name on it and cash it if you do it the right way. And for that matter, it's not that hard to steal a credit card payment either. And a lot of doctors think that electronic funds transfers, you know, where an insurance company somewhere puts money right into your account, you know, that's inviolable, and it's not. If the insurance company is instructed by somebody who they believe is the doctor to put the money into a different account, of course they will comply. So if you change bank accounts, you know, there's a procedure you go through with the insurance companies who are doing direct deposit to get them to deposit the money into your new account instead of the one that they have been depositing to traditionally. And all I need to do as a thief is to understand how that process works and replicate it. And shazam, I've got some insurance company somewhere depositing money into my account instead of yours. So I want the audience to understand that any form of wealth transfer can be stolen. And if you think, you know, I'm safe because my practice doesn't take in much cash, you're not. Here's an example. So this is a stolen check, and it's not a tiny amount. I mean, this is a $15,000 check. Doctor's name there. Thief signs and deposit it. And I can tell you, we see this kind of stuff every week. So again, if you think a check with your name or your LLC's name on it is safe, it is not. So, Danny, that's the bad news, scare the pants off people. Let's talk about what to do about this. Because at this point in the lecture, you know, it's tempting for people to wish they had some Ativan handy, and you know that this is an unsolvable problem, and it absolutely is not. Thieves are smart, they're creative, and they're motivated, but there are some things you can do. The first thing is really simple. Dentistry has allowed itself to get out of step with how the rest of the world hires. Unfortunately, there is a culture in dentistry not to do proper background checking. And a lot of times somebody who steals from you would not have gotten hired if you knew everything about them that you should have. And I'm going to take you in a minute through the hiring process, and you can see some of the things that get missed. The second thing, and I talked about this, if you are not comparing what goes in the bank with what your practice management software says should go in the bank, you are an easy mark. And the third thing is this, a lot of stealing is noticed by coworkers. And unfortunately, dentistry hasn't really done enough to encourage and motivate those people to come forward. And I'm going to talk in a little while about how you can create a climate where if a staff member sees something, they're more likely to say something. So let's talk about hiring. And the lady on the screen who lives in Toronto, Canada, she's gone by a few different names. Irina Fuchs was her birth name. She also went for a while by her married name, which was Chernikovsky. I prefer Fuchs because, frankly, she's fooked a lot of dentists out of their money. Irina is like the Energizer Bunny of serial embezzling. She has worked for at least 15 different doctors and stolen from every one of them. How does she do that? She knows that dentists don't investigate backgrounds very well, and that when somebody shows up who has a good resume, who's well presented, who's well spoken, and knows their practice management software, they get hired. And one thing, Danny, I'm sure you've heard as I hear repeatedly now is, it's hard to find staff. I mean, there's a labor shortage right now, and that I think sometimes pushes dentists in the wrong direction when they say, well, I only got one applicant for this job, so there's no real point in digging into their background. Well, there certainly is. If that person is a serial embezzler or an axe murderer, it's a lot better to find that out now than 6 months from now. But Irina wasn't really a great thief. Her true talent is getting hired. And she's managed to do that over and over again. I mean, she typically gets caught after about 3 or 4 months. And I think I told you already that the average embezzler gets away with it for almost 2 years. Well, Irina is a below average thief, but she's above average at getting hired. This is what is a proper background screening. And what I would do here is invite the audience to compare this with what they do now, and I think they'll see some deficiencies. The first thing is very simple. You can do all the investigation you want on the wrong person, and it will prove absolutely nothing. So when you interview people, what I want you to do is very simple. Ask whoever you're interviewing, I just need to see a photo ID from you, government issued photo ID, and 2 secondary pieces of identification. So do this at the interview. So anything for secondary will work, credit card, library card, gym membership, student card, whatever. But you want to see one with their photo and 2 others. If somebody gets hired by you, they know that there's that I-9 form that has to be completed, and it requires an identity verification. So at that moment, they're ready. They're typically not ready if they're gaming you during the interview process. And, if I'm applying for a job with you and I have a less than appealing past, one of the best things I can do is not use my name, but use my siblings instead. And again, you will do an extensive background check on the wrong person and accomplish nothing. So first thing we want to do is be sure of who's sitting in front of us. One place dentists fall down miserably is in talking with former employers. And my rule here is very simple. I need to speak with everybody that this employee has worked for at least the past 5 years. I was talking with a group of dentists the other day, and one of them said, well, I always check references. And as soon as I hear the word reference, I know they're barking up the wrong tree. When we talk about references, we're talking about like somebody's 8th grade science teacher, their parish priest, or their high school basketball coach. I don't give a flying donut what those people think about the applicant. What I want to know is people who saw this person in a work context, which is how I'm intending to see them. So that's where the former employers come in. And one takeaway tip here is this. Do not ever call any phone number that an applicant gives you, because you have no idea who's on the other end of the phone. So if somebody says they worked for Dr. Danny Bobrow in Chicago, Illinois, I'm going to let you guys all in on a little secret. Google is really cheap to use. So if If that's the former employer, I will go online, I will find Dr. Bobro's phone number online, I will call that number, and then I know who I'm speaking with. This one astounds me. You are all in a profession that has the ability to dispense controlled substances, and yet it is not customary when hiring dental staff to drug test them. It makes no sense. I'm traveling right now. Tonight I'm staying in a hotel. I can tell you categorically that the people at the front desk who checked me in, the people at the restaurant where I ate, have all been drug tested before they get their jobs. And what I can tell you about Hilton's, and I know this firsthand, is they do not have prescription pads sitting in every guest room. You do, and yet drug testing is not the norm. It makes no sense. The next thing for anybody with financial responsibility is we need to check their credit history. And I'm going to say something about this that also applies to a lot of the other steps here. Just because somebody has bad credit, that does not mean you shouldn't hire them. What it does mean is you need to understand why they have bad credit and then decide if that poses a threat to your practice. So I'll give you two scenarios just to illustrate my point. Let's say in the first scenario that you're looking at hiring somebody as a dental assistant, and the person you're looking at is a single parent with 2 kids, and they're not getting any financial help from the other parent, the non-custodial one. What I can tell you is with what dental assistants get paid, I would expect that person to have bad credit, and it probably wouldn't bother me. On the other hand, you're looking at hiring somebody to be an office manager, and their husband's a contractor and they live in the big house by the golf course and they have 2 SUVs in the driveway and they have bad credit. That terrifies me. That's somebody who's living really well off money they don't have. And when there are other sources of other people's money dry up, they're probably still not going to make the lifestyle choices that they have to make to live within their means, and instead they'll just steal from you. If somebody's working in a credentialed position like a hygienist or a dental assistant, we need to verify their credentials. Do not accept any piece of paper that says that somebody's licensed. Go back to the issuing body and verify. In 2021, forgery is super easy. I mean, everybody's got a computer and a good quality color laser printer home, and they can forge pretty much any document. My son's a college sophomore, you know, and when I was a kid, the way that we used to get report cards was that the school would put them in an envelope and give them to the child, in this case me, and my parents would open it, and I can tell you the reaction generally wasn't positive. In your cases, I'm expecting it might have been a little bit different, but when my son was in junior high school, they stopped that, and instead the parents would log into the school website on the parent side of the website and download the report cards there. Why the change? Because some of the kids would open the envelope, and if they didn't like the report card the school would give them, they would just sit at the computer, and half an hour later they would have one that turned 60s into 90s. So we need to be mindful that no piece of paper is worth very much anymore. I also won't hire somebody without looking at their social networking activity. You know, how does this person conduct themselves online? Social networking is a great way to see how people kind of communicate in their natural element. And you can learn a lot about somebody by doing that. And the final thing I want to do before I hire somebody is a criminal records check. I'm going to give you a very sobering statistic. 70 million Americans, so that's about 1 in 4 adults, has a criminal record. Now, like I said about the credit check, not every criminal record should stop somebody from hiring. Danny, is marijuana legal in Illinois now? I kind of lost track.
Yes, it is, both medical and recreational.
So there are people in Illinois who have a criminal record because they got caught with they got busted for drug possession 20 years ago, doing something that is now legal. And if that's what their criminal record was, that wouldn't stop me from hiring them. On the other hand, check fraud 2 years ago is a pretty easy no thanks. Again, the mere fact that somebody has a criminal record doesn't make them unhirable. It requires a decision on your part about whether this particular person poses a threat to your practice. We talked about reconciliation. I'm going to break it into 3 parts. The good news about this stuff, because a lot of dentists view it as donkey work, is that certain parts of it can be outsourced. And I'll try to hit on what needs to be done by you personally and what can be outsourced. The pictures you're seeing in the background are from what are called our Hall of Shame, which is part of our website. We have profiled over 600 dental embezzlers. And if you haven't been there, it's worth a look. You can also search by keywords. So, if you're in Dallas, you can find all the embezzlers who we've nailed in Dallas. On a daily basis, a couple of things to do. The first thing is this: whatever reports you as the practice owner rely on should be ones that you have printed yourself. As soon as you allow a staff member to print a report and hand it to you, you have given up control over the assumptions involved in generating that report. And it's entirely possible that you think it's reporting to you what happened in the whole practice, and it's not. So I know that there are people in the audience who don't know how to print a report in their practice management software, who kind of hope that they can make it through their whole career without ever learning the first thing about that software. Folks, that software is more important to your financial well-being than your handpieces. And yet you all know the handpiece like it's your child. But when it comes to practice management software, you have a strong urge to run the other way. If you are one of those people, this is a really good time in your career to get a little more comfortable with the software. And I'm not suggesting at all that you need to be able to do everything that your receptionist does, but you should be able to enter a basic transaction, to print a report, and of course to understand what those reports say and mean. And if you feel like you're deficient in this, every software company has trainers, and they love to take a doctor and teach them about the features in the software that can help that doctor do their job. On a monthly basis, there are really a few things to do. The first is to reconcile money coming in with where it went. So your practice management software will print a report saying, here's how much was collected this month. And that should line up to what went into your bank account. There are some little timing differences. So let's say on August 31st, somebody pays you by credit card. That money will not hit your bank account for a couple of days, but yet it's recorded in your practice management software on August 31st. So when you do this comparison, the starting place is that the numbers won't quite add up, but then you have to look at the stuff where one side of the transaction happened this month and the other side happened either last month or next month. Once you factor in those things, which accountants call timing differences, then it should balance exactly. The second task, and again, a bookkeeper can do this for you, is to look at the monthly information versus all the day sheets that you have in your hand. And those two should articulate with each other. In other words, they should add up to the penny. If they don't, what happened is somebody came in after hours and posted something, and you're not aware of it. We actually have a spreadsheet that will do the math for you on this. And if anybody wants the spreadsheet, I'll be giving an email address at the end, and just ask for it, and we'll be happy to send it along. And a few more things to do. The first thing is this. Your alarm company, and I'm going to assume that you have an alarm system on your practice, whether or not you have one in your house, because HIPAA more or less requires it. You may not know this, but the alarm company keeps track of whenever that alarm is armed or disarmed and who did it. And I'm hoping that you have unique codes. In other words, that everybody has their own individual code in the alarm system. If you're using what I call the Unicode, where there's one alarm code and everybody uses it, let's get that changed. Everybody needs their own. So the alarm company will be happy to send you every month a record of who armed and disarmed your alarm and when. Why is this important? Because thieves typically want alone time. In other words, they want to be by themselves in the practice when they steal. So they will come in early before everybody else, or everybody else will go home and they'll stay there, or they'll sort of slide into the office on a Saturday and do things. And if people are coming or going at weird times, that will be captured in this entry log. So ask the alarm company to send it to you. It's very short. Typically for a month, it will fit on a page or two. And take a look at that and see if anybody is spending weird hours in your practice. 3 other reports to look at, and they capture kind of the high risk end of your practice management software. So they are deleted transactions, modified transactions, and adjustments. And you need to take a look at those each month. Receivables report, and I want you to print it 2 ways. I want you to print it the normal way, and then I want you to filter out credit balances. And sometimes, depending on how people steal, receivables may be going through the roof. And one of the ways to try to hide that is create some credit balances. So when you filter out the credit balances, you, again, may get a little different picture of your receivables. And the final tip is get anybody who sends you a paper statement to send it to your home address and not the office. In other words, I want you to be the first person who sees that stuff. At an absolute minimum, it creates a little bit of mystery on the part of your staff about what you do with it. If statements get received first by the office manager, if he or she just sticks them in a drawer and you never come and ask for those statements, you're making it very clear to them that you have no oversight whatsoever on that particular account. On the other hand, if the statements come into your house and you open them up and you pass them opened to a staff member, then they don't know what you did with them. If statements come by email, then they should go to your email address first, and then you can open them and pass on the data files, the PDF file or whatever, to a staff member the same way. Let's make sure you're the first person to see that stuff. Here's an opportunity that a lot of practices don't really take advantage of. If we look across all businesses, so dentistry and everybody else, almost half of embezzlement is uncovered because somebody somewhere went to their boss and said, you know what, something's not right here. Whistleblower. However, when we narrow the focus to dentistry, that number falls to about 9%. So a dramatic difference in dentistry versus everybody else. And we can, I think pretty quickly of the reasons. One is that if you're a solo practitioner, you might have 3 or 5 or 8 staff. Of those 8 staff, 3 have front desk responsibility and everybody else is clinical. So if the whistle is blown on the office manager, logically, the only person it could have been would have been one of the 2 receptionists, and if I am one of those 2 receptionists, I probably have a pretty strong suspicion that it's going to be difficult to keep anonymity. The second thing is a lot of people have doubts. They don't want to go to you, the practice owner, because they're concerned they might be wrong and that that may blow back on them somehow. a lot of staff are more loyal to their coworkers than they are to you. And that impairs their ability or their desire to come forward. And the final point, and you may have heard the saying that you don't look a gift horse in the bicuspids. What I mean by that is that a lot of people who are stealing are also dispensing goodies somewhere, somehow to other staff. So in a lot of offices where we find an embezzler, we see a couple of other employees, for example, who are being paid at a higher hourly rate than they're supposed to, and the staff member who is stealing is the person in charge of that. A lot of thieves will dole out goodies to staff. And I'm not suggesting that the other staff are involved, but if I'm getting paid a couple of extra hours a month, or I'm getting a little more money than my employment agreement says or whatever, I am not really likely to blow the whistle on my Santa Claus. So there's a huge opportunity here, and if we can make people more comfortable coming forward, then you run the possibility of decreasing that 1.8 years that the typical embezzlement goes on undetected to something a lot shorter. Here's the thing. If I am sitting there now trying to decide whether or not to come forward, what will help me make it the decision you want is if I know how I'm going to be treated if I come to you and say, I have concerns about one of my colleagues. So the way to do that is to have a well thought out whistleblower policy that allows you to communicate, before people are ever in that position. If you come forward to me, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep it confidential. I'm going to not shoot the messenger. If your coming forward to me results in me preventing future losses, I'm going to give you a reward. That's the kind of stuff that can be in a whistleblower policy. So we have a template. We normally sell it for $129. What you guys may not know about Danny Bobrow is that he's a really good negotiator, and he kind of twisted my arm on this one and said, I'd really like you to share that with our audience. And I said, okay. So contact information is going to come up in a few more slides. If you want our whistleblower policy, and I also offered you our monthly monitoring spreadsheet, just send an email to the address that's going to show up in a few minutes, and we'll be happy to share those with you.
And let me thank you for doing that again, David. David tells the truth. He was not on the slide originally. So thank you again. On behalf of everyone.
Okay, I know when I've been had, guys, and it's right now, but I'm not that upset. So one of the best telltales of embezzlement is staff behavior, and we're going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to turn this over to questions about what it looks like when a staff member is stealing. And I mentioned this one already. Thieves want to be by themselves, so they will find a way to get in your office when nobody else is around. It depends on the pattern, but a lot of thieves don't want to take vacation, and they'll come up with some good reason not to. What happens when they go on vacation is that they lose control of how information flows through the practice, and that results, or it may result in them getting caught. So they don't want to leave. This is huge. They will be possessive about their duties, and it will often even extend to their workspace. So this could be the person who gets mad if somebody else sits at their desk or touches their computer. Actually, I was in a conversation this morning with, this is a DSO, a dental service organization. So they have multiple offices, and we're about to investigate the office manager in one of their offices. And DSOs have people called regional managers who oversee a group of offices. And one of the things that came out of the conversation this morning was that the office manager in this office would lock her own office, and she would refuse to let the regional manager into that space at all, which suddenly they've realized is suspicious. The cousin of territoriality is that they have no interest whatsoever in training anybody else to do any part of their duties, because as soon as they do that, it creates the possibility that their job gets broken up a little bit, and they certainly don't want that. So they just dig their heels in when it comes time to training anybody else to do any part of their job. The word that can terrify an embezzler is consultant. They know you really well. They know how to fool you. But when you say to your staff, I'm going to bring in a consultant, if I'm an embezzler, I just get this chill down my back, because this is a person who thinks about dentistry as a business more than a healing art, and of course is not under my spell. So they will threaten to quit if you bring in a consultant. They will come up with all kinds of reasons why you don't need the consultant, and that's why. This is a person who will cut ethical corners. So let's say, Danny, you and I are walking down the street in your town, and 50 feet in front of us, we see somebody's wallet fall out of their pants. Without giving it a whole lot of thought, we're going to bend down, pick up the wallet, walk a little faster, and tap the person on the shoulder and say, "Here, you dropped this." And the thief may do exactly the same thing, but they get there via a little different process. If they give the wallet back, it's because they've asked themselves a couple of questions, like, did anybody else see the wallet fall out of the pants? And probably, I wonder how much money is in the wallet. Now, their overt action may be the same, but they get there via a little different process. And the final thing is conspicuous displays of honesty. And what I mean by this is that honest people don't need to specifically highlight when they're being honest. And if you go back to that thing I showed you at the beginning with the thief's confession, where she had a big fat lie and the words that followed it were, "I am being honest with you." Okay, whenever anybody says that or writes it down, the chances are really good that they're in fact not being honest with you. I was doing a deposition a couple of years ago, so I'm helping a lawyer interview a suspect. And this woman must have said in this interview, which lasted about 2 hours, she must have said a dozen times the words, "I swear to God." If you think about what religion requires, and I'm talking about any religion I can think of, honesty is one of the cornerstones of any religion. And nobody who's truly religious needs to invoke the deity to confirm that they're doing what is already their duty.
Yeah, this is a really great slide. This alone gives so much insight. It reminds me of the movie Tin Men. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Of course I did, yeah.
Aluminum siding salesman. He drops the $5 bill in the living room, and that way, if the customer doesn't claims that it's his, then he knows that he's justified in ripping the guy off. And if he doesn't, at least he's just convinced him that he's an honest man because he's giving the money. So it's a cheap, easy way to earn some credibility.
It certainly is. Let's say now or next year or 5 years from now, you have concerns. Unfortunately, a lot of the things people want to do at that moment are well-intentioned but wrong. And the big mistake that people make is they do what I describe as flapping their wings and clucking. So they will go into the staff member and confront them, or they'll call the police, or they'll ask the suspect for a bunch of reports from practice management software that they've never asked for before, and then they go into their private office and close the door and talk to their CPA for an hour. They do all those things, and they're all really bad ideas. If you suspect, stealth is paramount. It is vital that the person you suspect not know that they're under suspicion, because if I've stolen from you and I think I'm about to get caught, and the consequence of that will be that I will go to jail, the list of things that I will refuse to do to prevent all that is very short. The charming couple on your screen are a great example. So the woman on the right is named Shante Joyner Hickman. Shante worked for a dentist in just outside Baltimore, Maryland, named Dr. Albert Rowe. Dr. Rowe was a little Korean gentleman of about 5'6" and 140 pounds. Shante had been embezzling from Dr. Rowe, and she thought she was about to get caught. So she came back to the practice one night when she knew Dr. Rowe would be there finishing his paperwork. She brought her cousin Dante Jeter, he's on your left, with her for some muscle. Dante's about 6'2" and 220 pounds. And the two of them took Dr. Rowe into the patient restroom and beat him to death. And I don't have to make this story any worse for your audience, Danny, but I'm going to anyway. The amount that had been embezzled to that point was $17,000. And for that, these two model citizens received prison sentences aggregating 40 years. And of course, Dr. Rowe's family got him home in a box. So if you suspect, it is really, really important that you not telegraph anything. And I did not come on here tonight to talk about what we do or how we do it. But one thing I will say is that if we are doing an investigation in your practice, there is zero chance that your staff will realize that we're doing it. It is 100% stealthy. So don't make the mistake that Dr. Rowe made and others have made and have paid dearly for it. If you think you have a problem, you need expert advice and you need it right now. And let's not make the mistake of confusing somebody who knows 20% more than you do with an expert. You know, sometimes people will go to their CPA or their practice management software trainer or their practice management consultant for help on this. And when it happens, no fooling around. You need somebody who thinks about this problem full time. Final thought. The dentists in the audience, their spouses, are likely more educated, probably more intelligent than their thieves. And it is really tempting to assume that in that battle of wits, that the smarter, more educated, more worldly person will prevail. Danny, I'm going to tell your audience a story. And a friend of mine's a dental CPA, and he was telling me this story once, and I saw the instant parallel with embezzlement. The problem that my friend, the dental CPA, has is that he has bird feeders in his backyard, and squirrels keep stealing his bird seed. So my friend tried everything he could think of, and nothing really worked. So finally, he did what no alpha male wants to do. He went into a hardware store and he asked for help. Not Home Depot, but the old-fashioned hardware store on the corner. So my friend went in and he asked the man behind the counter, who was a guy in his 50s. He asked the man for a squirrel-proof bird feeder. The guy from the hardware store said, "Sir, there's no such thing." Well, my friend wasn't quite ready to let it go. So he said, no, I can't be the only guy with this problem. You know, there has to be a way to keep squirrels out of my bird seed. Man from the hardware store came out from behind the counter, put his hand on my friend's shoulder. So obviously this is a pre-COVID story, and said to my friend, "Sir, I'm going to ask you a question and I want an honest answer." Seemed to be a little bit of military cadence in the guy's voice. Anyway, my friend said, "Okay, where's this going?" "Sir, how much time each week do you spend thinking about the squirrels eating your birdseed?" And my friend said, "I don't know, 20 minutes maybe." The guy from the hardware store still had his hand on my friend's shoulder. "Sir, I want you to think about this from the squirrel's perspective. Whether that squirrel survives this winter depends on how successful he is at eating your birdseed. And he probably wants to eat that birdseed even more than he wants to have sex with Mrs. Squirrel. Sir, who do you think is going to win? Well, actually, Danny, I have some video from my friend's backyard, and let's watch.
All right. Of the not Mr. and Mrs. Squirrel. Okay, good.
Yeah, sorry. These things are what they sell as squirrel-proof bird feeders, and if you don't know this about Danny, he's a climber, and he certainly recognizes an overhang when he sees one.
Yes, I do.
But you can see the squirrel says, I need a little different look at this because I really do want to survive the winter.
Wow.
And, you know, it's kind of amusing, but that just described every embezzler I've ever seen. You know, and you can see how the 2-pound squirrel was outsmarting my college-educated friend. And I will say exactly the same thing about the battle between you and the embezzler.
Motivation,
determination, and they think in a little different way. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with me tonight and listening to my stories. Danny, I'd love to take some questions now. And if anybody needs to reach me, the contact information is there. I will remind you that we offered you the whistleblower policy if you send an email to that address, and or the monthly monitoring spreadsheet that makes sure that those 20-day sheets that you have line up with the month-end report. And at that, sir, I will place myself in your hands for questions.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed, you know, you made what could easily have been a very dry subject anything but. You're a master storyteller. Really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that everybody agrees that they're walking away from this with a new appreciation for what can happen, but also what they can do about it. And in the short time remaining, let's get to a couple of questions here. First question is there any study correlating family members as employees to incidents of embezzlement? And then parenthetically is written, I realize hiring family members comes with its own set of challenges, of course.
Yeah, now I'm not sure from the question if the person is asking about hiring their own family or where they hire 2 or 3 people who are related to each other.
Well, I would assume, yeah, their own family, but maybe you could speak to both.
Okay. We see actually a surprising number of cases where embezzlement happens by the doctor's spouse. So doctor brings in his or her spouse to be their office manager, and the office manager /spouse starts stealing. Usually this is kind of an antecedent to divorce. We wrapped up a case about a year and a half ago, where a periodontist brought in her husband as office manager, and he took about $400,000.
Wow.
You know, and if you think about it, if my income comes from my wife's practice and I'm about to divorce her, I start thinking that I need money under the mattress, because until our affairs get settled, which could take a while, I need to buy groceries. Let me address the other one, which is that you have multiple people working for you from the same family. It's not always a bad thing, but one of the things everybody's been told about embezzlement is you need to divide up duties between different people. And that's based on an assumption, and let's make it explicit. The assumption is that I will be very reluctant to go to one of my coworkers and say, you know, I want to steal from our boss, but I really need your help.
Right.
The place, however,
there's no collusion.
Yeah, and that breaks down when these two people know each other really well, for example, if they are related. So I'm not saying don't hire family members of existing staff, but what I am saying is that's a place where collusion could happen.
Yep. All right, next, you mentioned embezzlement increased because of COVID. Why?
Yeah. Go back to the 2 reasons people steal. They're needy or greedy. So needy people are feeling kind of food insecurity. You know, they are the necessities of life are threatened. And that happened to a lot of people in COVID, because there was this big repositioning in the economy. If your spouse worked for an airline or was a travel agent, or, you live in Miami and they work in the cruise business or whatever, a lot of people lost their jobs, and there was some government money to cushion it. But that pushed the needy people. And one of the things that drives greedy people is the perception that their friends are getting ahead faster than they are. And, one of the things I shake my head at a little bit is how well the stock market has done over the past year and a half.
Me too.
And yeah, and if I am working for wages and my friends are in business and, they're doing really well for whatever reason, that bothers me. And that eggs on that group. One thing that we've noticed is that traditionally when people call us, we find embezzlement about 70% of the time. In the last 6 months, that number's been running at 82%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're saying too, when there's easier for someone to rationalize and justify the act, then the other things equal, you can expect an increase. So
absolutely,
agree. Yeah.
And in case anybody's wondering, that's me. Yeah, thieves need three things, Danny. They need what are called motive, opportunity, and rationalization. So they need to have a pressure that makes them steal. They need to have the opportunity, and that's there in basically every dental practice. And then they need to be able to tell themselves, it's okay to do this because, and whatever comes after the because is rationalization. So,
right.
Yeah, we're seeing that now.
All right. Getting down to the wire here. Can you suggest best ways to background check candidates, and then parenthetically credit/drug test/criminal record checks?
Yeah.
Or do you is that part of your offering?
It is not.
Okay.
There are companies that will do that stuff, and they'll do a fairly complete workup. Drug tests are done by a lab. There's normally a lab in any decent sized city that will do a drug test. Criminal records check needs to be outsourced to somebody, because private investigators have access to databases that the public doesn't. One question I get asked a lot is, well, is there some website I can go on somewhere and look and see if somebody has a criminal record? There are websites that purport to do that, and I can tell you that they're wildly inaccurate. So don't, there's one, for example, called truthfinder.com. It is very unreliable, and we work with it every day, and I can tell you that it just doesn't, it misses a lot of stuff. There are a lot of criminal records that just don't show up on Truthfinder.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it. Again, thank you very much for the great evening, very entertaining and as well as informative, and for agreeing to extend those generous offers to our attendees, David. I personally appreciate that very much, and I hope people take advantage of it. In a few days, you will receive an email with instructions on how to receive your CE credit. I now invite you to mark your calendar for Thursday, September 23rd at 6 p.m. Central Time, when my next guest will be Ms. Linda Drevenstedt, CEO of Drevenstedt Consulting. Linda's presentation is entitled Top Tier Talent Transformation, Producing Peak Performers. That all happens on Thursday, the 23rd of September at 6 p.m. Central. Until then, this is Danny Bobrow, thanking you for your ongoing commitment to practice perfection. And once again, thank you, David, for your wonderful presentation.
Always a pleasure to get a chance to spend some time with you, Danny, and thanks to the audience.
You are welcome. And good night, everybody.